Socrates was one of the most important figures in the history of Western philosophy, celebrated for his contributions to ethics, epistemology, and dialectical reasoning. He was born in Athens, Greece in 469 BCE. His father was a stonemason and his mother was a midwife. Socrates likely received a basic education. Little is known about his childhood, but he served as a soldier in the Peloponnesian War. Socrates is best known for his method of questioning, later called the Socratic method. This is a form of dialectical inquiry that seeks to uncover assumptions, expose contradictions, and stimulate critical thinking through persistent questioning. Unlike many philosophers of his time, Socrates wrote nothing down. His ideas are known primarily through the writings of his students, especially Plato. At the core of his philosophy was the pursuit of wisdom and the firm belief that virtue lies at the center of a meaningful life. His famous declaration, "The unexamined life is not worth living," has become one of the most enduring maxims in the history of philosophy. Socrates constantly challenged moral complacency and intellectual arrogance, advocating self-knowledge and ethical reflection. His other well-known saying, "Knowing that one knows nothing is the greatest wisdom," reflects this idea. His questioning often revealed contradictions in people's beliefs, earning him both devoted admirers and determined enemies. He rejected wealth and material pleasures, living a simple life and frequently conversing with citizens in public places in Athens. In 399 BCE, Socrates was tried and sentenced to death on charges of corrupting the youth and impiety. While imprisoned, he refused his friend's plan for escape, insisting on the dignity of truth and the law. After calmly discussing the immortality of the soul with his disciples, he drank the poison without fear. His final words were, "Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Do not forget to pay the debt." In his powerful courtroom defense, recorded in what is known as the Apology, he did not beg for mercy, but upheld his philosophical mission, arguing that although the death sentence was unjust, obedience to the laws of the city was a civic duty, and escape would be a betrayal of philosophical principles. Socrates exerted a profound influence on Western philosophy, directly shaping the thought of Plato, Aristotle, and countless later thinkers. His emphasis on reason, dialogue, and ethical inquiry remains central to philosophy and education today. Plato stands as a monumental figure in the history of Western philosophy. He was a student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle, born in Athens around 428 or 427 BCE into a wealthy and influential family. He enjoyed a privileged upbringing and received education in music, poetry, and athletics. The political turmoil of Athens in his youth, especially the execution of Socrates, profoundly shaped his philosophical outlook. Plato founded the Academy in Athens, one of the earliest institutions of higher learning in the Western world. He wrote in the form of dialogues, often featuring Socrates as the main speaker, exploring ethics, politics, metaphysics, epistemology, and education. The Republic is among his most famous works. In it, he describes a just society ruled by philosopher kings and presents the theory of forms, arguing that the sensory world is merely a shadow of a higher, eternal, and unchanging reality. Plato's metaphysics divides reality into two distinct realms, the intelligible world of forms and the sensible world we perceive. The world we perceive is a copy of intelligent forms or ideals, but these copies are imperfect. The true forms are perfect and immutable and can only be understood through intellect. This also implies that human intellect does not include sensory perception or imagination. Plato emphasized reason, the pursuit of truth, and the importance of a virtuous life. His famous allegory of the cave vividly illustrates the liberating power of education and philosophy, advocating that the enlightened should guide society. He believed that genuine knowledge arises from contemplation of eternal and perfect forms rather than from sensory experience. Plato's ideas laid foundations for Christian theology, political theory, and philosophy. His academy lasted for several centuries and trained outstanding thinkers, including Aristotle. Plato died around 347 BCE, and for over 2 millennia, his thought has continued to inspire discussions about ethics, politics, and the nature of reality. Aristotle was an ancient Greek philosopher whose thought encompassed nearly all fields of knowledge: science, ethics, politics, and metaphysics, profoundly shaping the Western intellectual tradition. He was born in 384 BCE in the northern Greek town of Stagira. His father was the court physician to the Macedonian king, which exposed Aristotle from a young age to medicine and biology. Orphaned at a young age, Aristotle was raised by a guardian. At 17, he entered Plato's academy, where he studied for 20 years. Although deeply influenced by Plato, he ultimately took a different path, emphasizing empirical observation and opposing the theory of forms. After Plato's death, Aristotle traveled extensively, conducting biological research, and was invited to serve as tutor to Alexander the Great. His famous saying, "I love my teacher, but I love truth more," captures this intellectual independence. In 335 BCE, Aristotle returned to Athens and founded the Lyceum, where he taught logic, ethics, politics, rhetoric, biology, and physics. His approach emphasized systematic observation and laid the foundations of modern science. His major works include Nicomachean Ethics and Politics, in which he proposed the doctrine of the golden mean, advocating reason, moderation, and practical wisdom. He elevated logic and biology into formal disciplines and established research foundations that endure to this day. He also articulated fundamental concepts of nature, arguing that the study of natural things yields useful knowledge. Aristotle's physics is more accurately translated as natural philosophy. His concept of physics differs from modern physics. The work is philosophical rather than a purely scientific text like contemporary physics, yet it is not purely abstract like metaphysics. It investigates natural phenomena and includes what we would now consider elements of physics, chemistry, biology, astronomy, and geology. The book studies the general principles of nature and the fundamental laws governing motion and change in the material world. This method, elevating phenomena to the level of philosophy by extracting common features from particular things, was truly epoch-making. Aristotle died in 322 BCE. In the Middle Ages, he was revered simply as the philosopher, and his ideas hold an unparalleled position in the history of philosophy and science. Augustine of Hippo was one of the most influential philosophers and theologians of early Christianity, whose thought profoundly shaped Western Christian theology. He was born on November 13, 354 CE, in Thagaste, North Africa, modern-day Algeria. His father was a pagan, while his mother, Monica, was a devout Christian whose prayers and perseverance played a decisive role in Augustine's eventual conversion. In his youth, Augustine was intellectually gifted, yet morally restless. He lived a life of excess, devoted to sensual pleasure while relentlessly questioning religious belief. He studied rhetoric in Carthage, passionately seeking truth, but remaining dissatisfied with Christianity. During this period, he adhered to Manichaeism and later fell under the influence of Neoplatonism, which deeply shaped his metaphysical outlook. In 384 CE, Augustine moved to Milan, where he encountered the preaching of Bishop Ambrose. Influenced by Ambrose's intellectual Christianity and his mother's long prayers, Augustine experienced a dramatic conversion in 386 and was baptized the following year. Reflecting on this turning point, he famously wrote, quote, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." End quote. After returning to North Africa, Augustine founded a monastic community and in 395 CE became Bishop of Hippo. His major works, Confessions and The City of God, explore themes of God, free will, evil, grace, and history. In Confessions, Augustine offered one of the earliest and most profound spiritual autobiographies, capturing the inner drama of sin and redemption. Quote, "Late have I loved you, beauty, so old and so new, late have I loved you." End quote. Augustine formulated the doctrine of original sin, arguing that human nature is fundamentally wounded by the fall and incapable of salvation without divine grace. He insisted that salvation is not achieved through human effort alone, but through God's mercy. Quote, "Grant what you command, and command what you will." End quote. By integrating Christian doctrine with classical philosophy, especially Neoplatonism, Augustine laid the intellectual foundations of medieval Christian thought. He died in 430 CE during the Vandal siege of Hippo, leaving behind a legacy that continues to shape theology, philosophy, and Western conceptions of the self.
René Descartes was one of the founding figures of modern philosophy and is often called the father of modern philosophy. He was born in 1596 in La Haye-en-Touraine, France, now Descartes, and lost his mother at an early age. Raised largely by his grandmother, Descartes grew up with fragile health but exceptional intellectual promise. He received a rigorous education at the Jesuit Collège de la Flèche, where he excelled in mathematics, logic, and classical studies. Although deeply trained in scholastic philosophy, Descartes grew dissatisfied with traditional authorities and bookish learning. He later earned a degree in law, not to practice it, but to understand human institutions before pursuing a life devoted to truth and inquiry. Descartes traveled widely across Europe, spending time in military service and engaging with scientific and intellectual circles. These years of travel reinforced his belief that certainty could not be grounded in tradition, custom, or sense experience alone. Instead, he sought a method capable of producing knowledge as certain as mathematics. This ambition culminated in Discourse on the Method and Meditations on First Philosophy, where Descartes introduced his method of systematic or universal doubt. He resolved to doubt everything that could possibly be doubted: sensory perceptions, inherited beliefs, even mathematical truths, until he reached something absolutely indubitable. In doing so, he arrived at his most famous conclusion: cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. This statement established self-conscious thought as the first and most certain foundation of knowledge. Even if all else were doubted, the act of doubting itself proved the existence of the thinking subject. As Descartes wrote, "But I had convinced myself that there was absolutely nothing in the world, and yet was I not then also something?" From this starting point, Descartes rebuilt knowledge on the basis of reason. He became the leading figure of rationalism, arguing that the mind, rather than the senses, is the ultimate source of certain knowledge. Mathematical clarity and logical deduction, he believed, revealed the underlying structure of reality. The reading of all good books is like a conversation with the finest minds of past centuries. One of Descartes' most influential doctrines is mind-body dualism. He argued that reality consists of two fundamentally distinct substances: res cogitans, thinking substance or mind, and res extensa, extended substance, or matter. The mind is immaterial, indivisible, and conscious. The body is material, divisible, and governed by mechanical laws. This sharp distinction profoundly shaped later philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, and debates about consciousness. I am not merely present in my body as a sailor is present in a ship. Beyond philosophy, Descartes made revolutionary contributions to mathematics. He founded analytic geometry, uniting algebra and geometry by representing geometric figures through numerical equations. This breakthrough provided essential tools for modern mathematics, physics, and engineering, and later enabled the development of calculus. In 1649, Descartes accepted an invitation to serve as tutor to Queen Christina of Sweden. Required to give early morning lessons in the harsh Scandinavian winter, Descartes struggled with the cold climate. In 1650, he died of pneumonia at the age of 54. René Descartes left behind a legacy that reshaped Western thought. By grounding philosophy in reason, self-awareness, and methodical inquiry, he transformed epistemology and set the agenda for modern science and philosophy. His work marks the decisive shift from medieval authority to modern critical reason, a shift that continues to define intellectual life today.
John Locke was an English philosopher whose ideas on empiricism, government, and individual rights profoundly influenced modern thought and political systems. He was born in 1632 in Rington, Somerset, England, and was raised in a Puritan household. His father was both a lawyer and a soldier, an experience that shaped Locke's lifelong concern with law, authority, and liberty. He received an excellent education, attending Westminster School before studying philosophy, medicine, and natural science at Christ Church, Oxford. Locke's interest in medicine brought him into close contact with leading scientists of his time, including Robert Boyle and Thomas Seiden, and he later became a Fellow of the Royal Society. His political career began when he served as secretary to Anthony Ashley Cooper, the Earl of Shaftesbury. This relationship deeply influenced Locke's political philosophy and sharpened his views on power, constitutional government, and resistance to tyranny. One of Locke's most important works is An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. In this book, he famously argued that the human mind is not born with innate ideas, but begins as a tabula rasa, or blank slate. All knowledge, he maintained, comes from experience through sensory perception and reflection. As Locke wrote, "Let us then suppose the mind to be, as we say, white paper, void of all characters, without any ideas. How comes it to be furnished? To this I answer in one word, from experience." This argument laid the foundation of empiricism and directly challenged the rationalist belief in innate knowledge. In political philosophy, Locke's two treatises of government articulated a revolutionary theory of natural rights. He argued that all individuals are born with inherent rights to life, liberty, and property, and that political authority is legitimate only when it rests on the consent of the governed. As Locke wrote, "Men being, as has been said, by nature all free, equal, and independent, no one can be put out of this estate and subjected to the political power of another without his own consent." Locke insisted that the purpose of government is not to restrict freedom, but to protect it. The end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. When governments violate this trust and threaten the natural rights of the people, Locke argued that resistance is not only justified, but morally necessary. Wherever law ends, tyranny begins. Locke also made lasting contributions to educational theory. In Some Thoughts Concerning Education, he emphasized character formation,
reason, and discipline over rote learning, famously observing, 9 parts of 10 are what they are, good or evil, useful or not, by their education. Locke's philosophy deeply influenced the Enlightenment and helped shape modern liberalism, constitutional government, and theories of education. His political ideas directly inspired the American and French revolutions, and his concept of natural rights is clearly echoed in documents such as the U.S. Declaration of Independence. John Locke died in England in 1904, leaving behind a legacy as one of the most influential thinkers in the history of Western philosophy.
David Hume was a Scottish philosopher, historian, and economic thinker, widely regarded as one of the greatest representatives of empiricism and philosophical skepticism. He was born in 1711 in Edinburgh, Scotland, and displayed extraordinary intellectual ability at an early age, entering the University of Edinburgh at only 12 years old. The core of Hume's philosophy is the claim that all human knowledge originates in experience. In his major philosophical work, A Treatise on the Human Nature, Hume argued that the human mind is composed entirely of perceptions, impressions, and ideas derived from sensory experience. He rejected the notion that reason alone can provide certain knowledge about the world. Hume's most radical contribution concerns causation and induction. He denied that reason can demonstrate any necessary connection between cause and effect. When we say that one event causes another, we are not perceiving necessity, but merely observing constant conjunction. This leads to his famous problem of induction. Why do we believe that the future will resemble the past? Why do we expect the sun to rise tomorrow simply because it always has? Hume's answer was unsettling. There is no rational justification for this belief. It is not grounded in logic or reason, but merely in psychological habit. Quote, "Custom, then, is the great guide of human life. Thus, our confidence in science and everyday reasoning rests not on rational certainty, but on mental conditioning." In moral philosophy, Hume rejected the idea that morality is based on reason. Instead, he argued that moral judgments arise from human sentiment and emotion. Reason, he claimed, can inform us about facts, but it cannot motivate action or determine moral value. Quote, "Reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions." Hume emphasized sympathy as the foundation of moral life, viewing moral approval and disapproval as rooted in shared human feelings rather than abstract principles. Hume was also deeply skeptical of religious belief. He critically examined traditional arguments for the existence of God, particularly the design argument, and questioned the rational basis of miracles. As a result, he was widely regarded in his lifetime as a dangerous and subversive thinker, which hindered his academic career. Although he did not receive full recognition during his life, Hume's influence proved immense. Most notably, Immanuel Kant later acknowledged Hume's impact with the famous admission, quote, "David Hume awakened me from my dogmatic slumber." Hume died in 1776. His philosophy remains foundational for epistemology, philosophy of science, and modern skepticism, continuing to challenge assumptions about reason, knowledge, and certainty. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was one of the most controversial and influential thinkers of the Enlightenment. He was born in 1712 in Geneva, Switzerland. His mother died shortly after his birth, and his father later abandoned him, leaving Rousseau to grow up in a state of instability and wandering, experiences that deeply shaped his views on society and human nature. Rousseau's central philosophical claim is that human beings are naturally good, but are corrupted by society.
In Discourse on the Origin and Basis of Inequality Among Men, Rousseau argued that social institutions, especially private property, are the true sources of inequality, domination, and moral decay. He famously wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Rousseau believed that early human societies were peaceful and egalitarian, and that the development of civilization, laws, and property created artificial hierarchies and dependence. In The Social Contract, Rousseau articulated one of the most influential theories of political legitimacy in modern thought. He introduced the concept of the general will, arguing that true political authority does not arise from kings, elites, or force, but from the collective will of the people as a whole. Quote, "The general will is always right and always tends toward the public good." For Rousseau, true freedom does not mean doing whatever one desires, but obeying laws that one has prescribed for oneself as a member of the political community. Rousseau also made enduring contributions to educational theory in Emile, or On Education. He advocated an education that follows the natural development of the child, emphasizing freedom, experience, and emotional growth rather than rigid discipline or rote learning. Quote, "Nature wants children to be children before they are men." Beyond philosophy and politics, Rousseau was a forerunner of Romanticism, emphasizing emotion, authenticity, nature, and individual experience in opposition to Enlightenment rationalism. Rousseau died in 1778. His ideas profoundly influenced the French Revolution and continue to shape modern political philosophy, democratic theory, education, and debates about freedom, equality, and the role of society. Immanuel Kant was born in 1724 in Königsberg, Prussia, now Kaliningrad, Russia, and spent nearly his entire life in that city. He was a central figure of the Enlightenment, the founder of German classical philosophy, and one of the most influential thinkers in the history of Western thought. Kant's philosophy reshaped modern philosophy and gave rise to major intellectual movements, including German idealism, Kantian deontological ethics, and later Neo-Kantianism. Kant is often regarded as the last great philosopher of the Enlightenment and the leading representative of German intellectual life in that era. He sought to resolve the long-standing conflict between rationalism, represented by thinkers such as René Descartes, and empiricism, associated with Francis Bacon, John Locke, and David Hume. Kant famously acknowledged the decisive impact of Hume on his thinking, stating that Hume had awakened him from his dogmatic slumber. For this synthesis, Kant is frequently considered, after Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, one of the most influential philosophers in Western history. Kant developed a comprehensive and original philosophical system, the core of which is expressed in his three major works, collectively known as the Three Critiques: Critique of Pure Reason, Critique of Practical Reason, and Critique of Judgment. Together, these works systematically articulate Kant's theories of knowledge, epistemology, ethics, morality, and aesthetics. Among them, Critique of Pure Reason holds a particularly pivotal place in the history of philosophy. It marked a revolutionary shift in philosophical inquiry from ontology, the study of what exists, to epistemology, the study of how we know. Kant argued that philosophy must first examine the limits and conditions of human knowledge before making claims about reality. This work stands as one of the most transformative texts in Western philosophy. At the heart of Kant's epistemology is his claim that knowledge begins with experience but does not arise solely from experience. All our knowledge begins with experience, but it does not follow that it all arises from experience. Kant proposed that the human mind possesses a priori structures, innate forms and concepts that actively organize sensory data into coherent experience. Sensory intuition provides raw material, while the understanding applies pure concepts known as the categories, such as causality, unity, and substance. Without these innate rational functions, experience itself would be intelligible. In this sense, the mind does not merely receive the world, it actively shapes it. Kant also distinguished between the phenomenal world, the world as it appears to us through experience, and the noumenal world, things as they are in themselves, arguing that human knowledge is limited to phenomena. Concepts such as God, the immortality of the soul, and free will cannot be known theoretically, but they remain essential as practical ideas of reason guiding moral life. In ethics, Kant developed one of the most influential moral theories in modern philosophy, deontological ethics, centered on duty rather than consequences. He introduced the concept of the categorical imperative, a universal moral law that applies to all rational beings, regardless of personal desire or circumstance. One of its famous formulations states, "Act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law." Another formulation emphasizes the intrinsic dignity of the human person. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never merely as a means. By grounding morality in rational autonomy, Kant laid the philosophical foundation for modern concepts of human dignity, human rights, and moral responsibility. For Kant, true freedom is not the absence of constraint, but obedience to laws that reason gives to itself. Kant's philosophy places supreme value on reason, autonomy, and moral dignity. His ideas profoundly influenced later German idealists such as Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel, as well as modern ethics, political philosophy, and theories of justice. Neo-Kantian movements in the 19th and 20th centuries further extended his influence across philosophy, law, and the social sciences. Immanuel Kant died in 1804, but his intellectual legacy endures. His work transformed philosophy into a critical examination of reason itself and continues to shape debates about knowledge, morality, freedom, and the limits of human understanding.
Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was born on August 27, 1770, in Stuttgart, then the capital of the Duchy of Württemberg within the Holy Roman Empire, in present-day southwestern Germany. He was one of the most important philosophers of the 19th century and a central representative of German idealism, whose work profoundly shaped modern philosophy, political theory, and historical thought. Hegel developed one of the most ambitious philosophical systems in Western history. His philosophy is traditionally divided into three major parts. 1. Logic. 2. Philosophy of nature. 3. Philosophy of spirit, mind. The latter two were collectively referred to by Hegel as real philosophy, understood as concrete applications of the abstract structures developed in logic. The phenomenology of spirit functions as an introduction to the entire system, tracing the development of consciousness from sense certainty to absolute knowing, but it does not belong to any single part of the system itself. This tripartite structure is often seen as inspired by Neoplatonic triad models, especially that of Proclus, being, emanation, return, as well as by the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. Although the basic structure appeared in manuscripts as early as 1805, Hegel's system reached its definitive form with the publication of the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences in 1817.
Hegel insisted that his philosophy must be grasped as an integrated whole. Quote, "The true is the whole," unquote. To privilege any single part of the system, he argued, would result in a one-sided, incomplete, or distorted interpretation. Philosophically, Hegel held Kant in exceptionally high regard and consciously developed his work in response to Kantian philosophy. He praised Kant's concept of the moral law as an expression of genuine freedom, not merely negative freedom or habitual liberty, but freedom grounded in rational self-determination. At the same time, Hegel criticized Kant's concept of the thing in itself, which seemed to imply that objective reality could never be fully known. For Hegel, such a limit undermined philosophy's ultimate task. Hegel believed his own age stood at a decisive historical turning point. He described both the traumas and the achievements of his time and proclaimed the birth of a new world, manifested not only in philosophy but also in international politics. As the world spirit, Weltgeist, entered a new historical stage, philosophy, he believed, was approaching its final vocation, a comprehensive understanding of history, reason, and human freedom. Hegel conceived reality itself as a historical process, driven by the resolution of internal contradictions. Quote, "The history of the world is none other than the progress of the consciousness of freedom," unquote. Each historical stage arises to overcome the limitations of the one before it. A famous example in Hegel's philosophy of history is his interpretation of the French Revolution. He regarded it as the first moment in Western history in which genuine freedom was explicitly asserted as a universal principle. Yet precisely because it was an absolute beginning, it was also absolutely radical. Having destroyed its former opposition, the revolution unleashed a cycle of violence that could not restrain itself, culminating in the terror. The freedom it had so painfully achieved turned into its opposite. Nevertheless, history advances through learning from its own failures. Only after such experiences, Hegel argued, could a constitutional state emerge, one composed of free citizens capable of rational self-government, reconciling liberty and equality within stable institutions. Hegel's academic career reflected his growing influence. In 1816, he became professor of philosophy at the University of Heidelberg. In 1818, he accepted a position at the University of Berlin, then the capital of Prussia. In October 1829, Hegel was appointed rector of the University of Berlin, marking the height of his institutional authority. In August 1831, a cholera epidemic reached Berlin, prompting Hegel to leave the city temporarily. Believing the danger had subsided, Hegel returned at the start of the autumn term. On November 14, 1831, Hegel died after contracting cholera. The poet Heinrich Heine reported Hegel's alleged final words as, quote, "Only one man ever understood me, and even he did not understand me," unquote. Though some scholars regard this remark as apocryphal, it captures the enduring reputation of Hegel's philosophy as both profoundly influential and notoriously difficult. After his death, Hegel's followers split into old or right Hegelians and young or left Hegelians. The latter group included Ludwig Feuerbach and Karl Marx, who transformed Hegel's dialectic by placing it on a materialist foundation. In the 20th century, Hegel's thought was further developed within French Hegelianism, critical theory, and became an essential reference point for existentialism. From the early 20th century onward, Hegel experienced a major philosophical revival. A pivotal moment was the publication of Georg Lukács's History and Class Consciousness, which sparked renewed interest in Hegel's dialectic and early writings. Contemporary Anglo-American philosophy has also been deeply influenced by Hegel, particularly in social theory, political philosophy, and debates about reason, recognition, and normativity. Hegel's legacy remains both controversial and indispensable. His vision of reality as a rational, historical process continues to challenge modern thought, offering one of the most powerful attempts to comprehend freedom, history, and human self-understanding as a unified whole.
Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche was a German philosopher, poet, cultural critic, classical philologist, and composer. He was born on October 15, 1844, in the small town of Rocken, near Leipzig, then part of the Prussian province of Saxony. His name was given in honor of King Friedrich Wilhelm IV, who happened to be celebrating his 49th birthday on the day of Nietzsche's birth, a coincidence his parents regarded as a good omen. Nietzsche later abandoned the middle name Wilhelm. Nietzsche's father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche (1813–1849), was a Lutheran pastor and teacher. His mother, Franziska Oehler (1826–1897), was his mother. His younger sister, Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche, was born in 1846, and his younger brother, Ludwig Joseph, in 1848. Tragedy struck early. Nietzsche's father died of a brain illness in 1849, and his brother died 2 years later. In 1850, the family moved to Naumburg on the Saale River, where Nietzsche grew up in a household dominated by women, his mother, grandmother, and 2 unmarried aunts, since his mother never remarried. These early losses and domestic circumstances profoundly shaped his psychological and philosophical outlook. Before turning to philosophy, Nietzsche was trained as a classical philologist, a field in which he demonstrated exceptional talent. At the age of 24, shortly after completing his studies, he was appointed Associate Professor of Classical Philology at the University of Basel, an extraordinary achievement for someone so young. In 1979, however, persistent health problems forced him to resign from his academic post. Thereafter, Nietzsche lived as an independent writer, traveling frequently in search of climates conducive to his fragile health, primarily in Switzerland and Italy. During these wandering years, he produced most of his major works. In 1889, Nietzsche suffered a severe mental collapse from which he never recovered. He spent the remainder of his life under the care of his mother and later his sister, dying in 1900. Nietzsche's writings span philosophy, poetry, cultural criticism, aphorism, and literary experimentation. He showed a strong preference for aphoristic style, irony, and provocation, deliberately rejecting systematic philosophical exposition. One of the defining features of his thought is a radical critique of truth itself and a defense of perspectivism, the view that there are no absolute, objective truths independent of interpretation. There are no facts, only interpretations. Nietzsche launched a relentless attack on traditional religion, especially Christianity, which he regarded as a life-denying moral system. His famous proclamation, "God is dead," was not a theological claim, but a cultural diagnosis. It signaled the collapse of traditional metaphysical and moral frameworks in modern Europe and the onset of nihilism, the crisis of meaning that follows the loss of absolute values. In response to this crisis, Nietzsche sought not despair, but affirmation. He called for a revaluation of all values, advocating an aesthetic and life-affirming approach to existence. Central to this project is his distinction between master morality and slave morality.
Master morality arises from strength, creativity, and affirmation of life, while slave morality emerges from resentment, ressentiment, towards the powerful. Nietzsche argued that concepts such as good and bad in master morality are transformed into good and evil in slave morality, reversing value judgments and condemning vitality as sin. The slave revolt in morality begins when resentment itself becomes creative and gives birth to values. Nietzsche understood human beings as expressions of competing forces of will, which he famously conceptualized as the will to power. This idea doesn't simply refer to domination over others, but a fundamental drive towards self-overcoming, creativity, and expansion of strength. Nietzsche believed this concept explained human behavior more powerfully than Plato's eros, Schopenhauer's will to live, or utilitarian moral theories, though its precise meaning remains a subject of intense scholarly debate.
Among Nietzsche's most influential ideas are the concepts of the Übermensch, or overman, and eternal recurrence. The Übermensch represents an ideal of human self-creation, one who overcomes inherited moralities and creates new values through strength, discipline, and artistic affirmation of life. Nietzsche challenged individuals to live as though every moment of their life were to be repeated eternally. Quote, "What if someday or night a demon were to steal after you and say, 'This life, as you now live it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more.'" End quote. Nietzsche believed that only those who could affirm life under this condition were truly strong. The philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer exerted a profound influence on the young Nietzsche, particularly Schopenhauer's pessimism. However, Nietzsche later rejected pessimism, transforming suffering into a source of creative power rather than despair. He famously wrote, quote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," end quote. Nietzsche subjected morality, religion, philosophy, science, and art to relentless critique. He believed modern culture was weaker and more decadent than that of ancient Greece, and repeatedly attacked Christian morality as well as Christian and Platonic metaphysics. By questioning the value of truth itself, Nietzsche became a forerunner of postmodern philosophy, anticipating later critiques of objectivity and foundationalism. Nietzsche was often criticized for lacking a constructive philosophical system. He himself rejected the very idea that philosophy should construct rigid systems. In the preface to Beyond Good and Evil, he argued that many philosophical systems merely disguise deep-seated prejudices, such as belief in the soul, as universal truths. Nevertheless, Nietzsche did propose constructive ideals, particularly the Übermensch and eternal recurrence, which he regarded as goals humanity could strive toward through self-discipline and creative power. His major works include Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, Twilight of the Idols, Human All Too Human, and The Birth of Tragedy. Shortly after Nietzsche's death, his sister Elizabeth compiled and published a collection of his notes under the title The Will to Power. Because this work was posthumously edited and ideologically shaped by her, most scholars agree that it does not reliably represent Nietzsche's authentic philosophical intentions. Nietzsche's thought experienced a major revival in the 1960s and has since exerted enormous influence on 20th and early 21st century philosophy. His ideas have deeply shaped existentialism, postmodernism, post-structuralism, and broader continental philosophy. Today, Nietzsche remains one of the most provocative and contested thinkers in the Western tradition, a philosopher whose work continues to challenge assumptions about truth, morality, culture, and the meaning of human existence. Martin Heidegger was born on September 26, 1889, in the small town of Meeskirch in Baden-Württemberg, Germany. His father served as a sexton at the local Roman Catholic Church. Heidegger grew up in a devout Catholic environment. His sister, Maria, was born in 1992, and his brother followed in 1994. Heidegger received his early education in church-run schools. At the age of 17, he borrowed Franz Brentano's book On the Manifold Meaning of Being According to Aristotle from a priest, an encounter that sparked his lifelong fascination with the question of being. In 1909, Heidegger entered the University of Freiburg, initially studying theology for 2 years before turning to philosophy. Alongside philosophy, he also studied the humanities and natural sciences. In 1913, Heidegger completed his doctoral dissertation, The Doctrine of Judgment in Psychologism, earning his PhD in 1914. After the outbreak of the First World War, he enlisted in the German army in August 1914, but was discharged 2 months later due to poor health. In 1917, he married Elfriede Petri and was subsequently called back into military service, serving on the Western Front. Throughout this period, Heidegger remained largely in Germany and devoted himself intensely to scholarly work. After returning from the war in 1918, Heidegger became the senior assistant to the philosopher Edmund Husserl at the University of Freiburg. Under Husserl's guidance, he taught and conducted research, focusing especially on Aristotle. Although deeply influenced by Husserl's phenomenology, Heidegger's teaching already departed from orthodox phenomenological methods. In November 1920, when a faculty position opened at Freiburg, Husserl recommended Heidegger to Paul Natorp as a rising philosophical talent. In 1923, Heidegger was appointed professor of philosophy at the University of Marburg, where he quickly gained a reputation as an exceptionally original and demanding thinker. His lectures attracted many outstanding students. A lecture course from the summer of 1925, History of the Concept of Time, became the conceptual foundation for his most famous work, Being and Time. In late 1925, Heidegger was nominated for a full professorship, which required the immediate publication of a major work. Between January and April 1926, he withdrew to his mountain cabin and transformed the lecture material into the first 240 pages of Being and Time. During this period, Husserl vacationed nearby in Todtnau-Berg and discussed with Heidegger key ideas such as being in the world. In February 1927, Being and Time was published in Yearbook for Phenomenology and Phenomenological Research and simultaneously as a standalone volume. 6 months later, Heidegger was awarded the title of full professor in Berlin. In 1928, following Husserl's retirement, Heidegger resigned his position at Marburg and returned to Freiburg to succeed him as professor of philosophy at Freiburg. From 1931 onward, Heidegger's relationship with the German National Socialist Party grew increasingly close. In 1933, he joined the Nazi Party and was elected rector of the University of Freiburg. His inaugural rectoral address, Rectoris Rede, employed language closely aligned with Nazi ideology, particularly his claim that German universities should educate the leaders and guardians of the destiny of the German people, and his insistence that higher education rest on 3 pillars: labor service, military service, knowledge service. Although Heidegger resigned the rectorship in 1934, he never formally left the Nazi Party. From 1945 to 1947, the French occupation authorities barred Heidegger from teaching because of his political involvement. In 1951, restrictions on his emeritus status were further tightened, though he was later invited to lecture in 1951, 1958, and 1967.
Heidegger died on May 26, 1976, in his hometown of Meßkirch and was buried according to Roman Catholic rites. Philosophically, Heidegger argued that Western philosophy since Plato had fundamentally misunderstood the meaning of being. Instead of asking what it means to be, philosophers focused on particular beings, entities, and their properties, thereby neglecting the more fundamental question of being itself. Heidegger rejected the idea that being could be treated as a mere object of analysis. Rather, he insisted that being must be understood through human existence, which he famously called Dasein, the being for whom being is an issue. For Heidegger, a more trustworthy analysis of being requires investigating the pre-theoretical conditions that allow beings to appear at all. He believed that traditional philosophy ignored these foundational structures and mistakenly applied derived theoretical concepts universally, leading to deep misunderstandings of both being and human existence. To correct this, Heidegger argued that philosophy must retrace its historical steps and rethink its origins. From the mid-1930s onward, Heidegger undertook a systematic reinterpretation of the history of Western philosophy. Using phenomenological, hermeneutic, and ontological approaches, he examined major philosophers to uncover unexamined assumptions underlying their thought. He argued that all metaphysical systems share a one-dimensional understanding of reality, which he identified as the defining mark of metaphysics itself. According to Heidegger, this metaphysical worldview reached its culmination in modern technology. He did not view technology merely as a neutral tool for achieving human ends, but as a mode of revealing that reshapes how humans understand the world. Through technology, nature becomes seen primarily as a resource to be exploited. Given the global spread of technological thinking and the unrestrained consumption of natural resources, Heidegger regarded modern technology as posing a profound and unavoidable danger. In contrast, Heidegger viewed art as a counterforce to technology. From the late 1930s onward, inspired by the poetry of Hölderlin, Heidegger sought alternative ways of relating to the world beyond technological domination. Art, for Heidegger, opens a space in which truth can be revealed without reducing beings to mere objects of control. Heidegger attempted to redirect philosophy away from epistemology and metaphysics towards ontology, the question of the meaning of being itself. In his later writings, especially after 1950, he increasingly emphasized the role of language, arguing that language, shaped by history, can resist the reductive tendencies of metaphysical thinking. Language is the house of being. Heidegger rejected the idea that humans stand at the center of the world. Instead, he claimed that humans dwell within an interconnected whole he called the fourfold: earth, sky, mortals, and divinities. Humans should inhabit the world as finite, mortal beings who care for it, rather than seeking to dominate it. Central to Heidegger's existential analysis is the concept of being toward death, Sein zum Tode. Death, he argued, individualizes human existence. No one can die in our place, and death can occur at any moment. Facing death allows individuals to break free from everyday distractions and live authentically. One must not deny death while affirming life. Rather, one must include death in one's understanding of existence. This insight forms the basis of Heidegger's famous idea of living toward death. Heidegger was one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. He is widely regarded as a foundational figure of existential philosophy, profoundly shaping thinkers such as Jean-Paul Sartre, who adopted many of Heidegger's concepts. His work has been influential across Germany, France, Japan, and North America, and existentialism remains one of the most influential philosophical movements in the contemporary world. At the same time, Heidegger's legacy remains deeply controversial because of his involvement with Nazism. His former student, Hannah Arendt, defended him by describing his political engagement as a personal error, largely unrelated to his philosophy. Other critics, including Emmanuel Levinas and Karl Loeth, argued that Heidegger's political choices revealed moral flaws within his thinking itself. Despite ongoing debates, Heidegger's work continues to shape philosophy, literature, political theory, ecology, and cultural criticism. His relentless questioning of being remains one of the most radical and enduring challenges in modern thought.
Ludwig Joseph Johann Wittgenstein was an Austrian-born philosopher who later became a British citizen. He is widely regarded as one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. His work fundamentally reshaped logic, philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, and philosophy of mathematics, and continues to define major debates in analytic philosophy. Wittgenstein was born on April 26, 1889 in Vienna into one of the wealthiest families of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His family was culturally sophisticated and musically gifted, but also marked by deep tragedy. 3 of his brothers later died by suicide. In 1913, Wittgenstein inherited an enormous fortune from his father. Even before the First World War, he gave substantial financial support to poets and artists in need, including Georg Trakl, Rainer Maria Rilke, and the architect Adolf Loos through the editor Ludwig von Ficker of Der Brenner. After the war, suffering from depression, Wittgenstein gave away the remainder of his inheritance to his siblings. Between 1929 and 1947, Wittgenstein taught at the University of Cambridge, where he became a central but unconventional figure. Despite his enormous influence, he published very little during his lifetime. His major published works consisted of only one book, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, 1921, one philosophical article, one book review, and a dictionary for Austrian elementary school children. Most of his philosophical writings remained in manuscript form and were edited and published after his death. Among these posthumous works, Philosophical Investigations, published in 1953, is the most famous and influential. It is widely regarded as a turning point in the philosophy of language and is often cited as one of the most important philosophical works of the 20th century, a cross-disciplinary masterpiece that attracted sustained attention across multiple fields and traditions. Wittgenstein's philosophy is commonly divided into early and later periods. The early Wittgenstein, represented by the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, focused on the logical structure shared by the world and meaningful propositions. At this stage, he believed that philosophical problems could be resolved by clarifying the logical form of language. According to this view, language pictures reality, and anything that cannot be logically expressed must be passed over in silence. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. By contrast, the later Wittgenstein, most clearly expressed in Philosophical Investigations, rejected many of the assumptions of the Tractatus. He argued that the meaning of a word is not determined by its logical form or reference, but by its use within a particular context, which he called a language game. The meaning of a word is its use in the language. Language, he insisted, is not a single unified system, but a collection of diverse practices rooted in forms of life. Philosophical confusion arises when language is taken out of the everyday contexts in which it functions. Wittgenstein's life was marked by repeated withdrawals from academic philosophy. During the First World War, he served as a frontline officer and was repeatedly decorated for bravery.
After the war, he left academia to work as a primary school teacher in remote Austrian villages, where he became embroiled in controversy for using corporal punishment, especially in mathematics classes, an episode he later deeply regretted. During the Second World War, he worked in London as a hospital porter and laboratory assistant, at times advising patients not to take doctors' prescribed medications. He also worked at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle upon Tyne. Throughout his life, he repeatedly expressed remorse over his conduct and devoted himself increasingly to revising his philosophical manuscripts, particularly the work that would become On Certainty. Wittgenstein was deeply critical of scientism and the modern obsession with progress and theoretical construction. In Culture and Value, he wrote that it was unimportant whether typical Western scientists understood his work, because they could not understand what he meant by the word soul. He criticized modern civilization for defining itself by progress, arguing that progress is its form, not its essence. Civilization, he believed, is constantly constructing ever more complex structures, while clarity has ceased to be an end in itself and become merely a means. For Wittgenstein, clarity possessed intrinsic value. He was not interested in erecting theoretical edifices, but in understanding their foundations clearly. According to his close friend George Henrik von Wright, Wittgenstein believed that his work had been widely misunderstood and distorted, even by professional philosophers. He doubted that future generations would understand him any better. On one occasion, he remarked that he felt he was writing for people who breathed a different air than that of modern humanity. He once said that he could not say, "See you tomorrow," because it would amount to predicting the future, something he believed he could not legitimately do. In early 1951, Wittgenstein realized that he was nearing the end of his life. On January 29th, he wrote his will in Oxford, appointing Rush Rhys as executor and G.E.M. Anscombe and George Henrik von Wright as trustees of his philosophical works. In a letter to Norman Malcolm, he wrote, "My mind is completely dead, but this is not a complaint, since I am not suffering. I know that life must come to an end, and that the mind is the first thing to go." In February, he returned to the home of Dr. Edward Bevan, where he continued working on manuscripts that later became On Certainty and Remarks on Color. On April 26th, his 62nd birthday, he began writing his final manuscript. That afternoon, he went for a walk and wrote his last philosophical note. That evening, upon being told that he had only days to live, he exclaimed, "Good." On the night of April 28th, with Mrs. Bevan at his bedside, Wittgenstein lost consciousness. Before doing so, he said, "Tell them I've had a wonderful life." Wittgenstein died on April 29, 1951. His philosophical legacy is unique. He rejected systematic theory building, sought clarity over explanation, and transformed philosophy into an activity aimed at dissolving confusion rather than constructing doctrines. Few philosophers have so radically reshaped how we think about language, meaning, mind, and philosophy itself. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, tell us in the comments which philosophers you enjoy most, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you again, and goodbye.